Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Thursday night Santa Monica KTC Sangha gathering. We have Lama Kathy joining us this evening. We're so very grateful to have you with us, Lama K. We'll be doing the Joyful Wisdom book study. We have a website, which is santamonica.ktc.com. And on that website, you can find out a lot about what's going on in our center, the different Thursday evening sessions we're having with different lamas, and also how to become a member of Santa Monica KTC. And if you would like to make a donation this evening towards our teaching with Lama Kathy, you can do so on our website, or you can do so through the newsletter that we sent everybody as a reminder for this evening. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Lama Kathy, and thank you so much.
Oh yeah, no, thanks everybody. And it's always fun to look at my calendar and see that it's time to visit Santa Monica. So I'm really happy that you guys are continuing your Dharma activity and making Dharma teachings and meditation available to folks in your region. So yay. So we'll start with because you have already done some meditation, we'll start with the mental taking of refuge and engendering of the Bodhisattva attitude, thinking that we dedicate this session of discussion to the benefit of all and liberation of all sentient beings without exception. So we'll start with that. And then by way of introduction, we are still working with Mingyur Rinpoche's book, Joyful Wisdom. We're entering now he has already talked a lot about the theory behind the Tibetan practices of taming the mind. And as such, he's talked about the difficulties of modern life and how we stress out about so many different things, and in so doing, how we create some difficulties for ourselves through our habits and our habitual tendencies and our reactions to things. So now he's getting into the practical aspect of his teaching, where he's going to talk to us about taming our minds. And we're starting our discussion this evening on page 130 of the hardback book, which I'm assuming is the same in the paperback edition. He's talking about all of the different ways of working with mind and working with our concept of self. And so on page 130, he is talking about the discomforts that we feel, the emotional and mental discomforts that we can feel in our life. And he says in the third paragraph on this page, he says, most of us can admit that we feel discomfort to some extent or other, and that our experience is to some degree conditioned by our minds. But we tend to get a little stuck at that point, either by trying to change our minds or by letting our thoughts, emotions, and compulsions simply take over. And I guess you could say it's as though I frequently say human beings do extremes really well, but we don't do middle, we don't do nuance. We have a lot of all or nothing thinking. And this all or nothing thinking is such things. I've had people say to me, oh, I'm either going to run away from my life and go and join a monastic order, or I'm going to become completely lost in worldly life. There's no middle. Well, it's not really like that. There is a middle, and we occupy it. And so since we're already in that middle, let's examine that middle. Let's examine what it's like to not be an all or nothing person. What is it like to live a life of complexity? And that's what he talks about in the next paragraph. He says there's a third alternative to all or nothing. the method or means proposed by the Buddha himself is simply to look at the various thoughts, emotions, and so on as various expressions of the infinite potential of the mind itself. So in other words, instead of blaming ourselves and saying we have so many bad habits or we're bad people or whatever, instead of laying blame and judging ourselves negatively, we could actually begin to look at our minds, our thoughts, and our emotions with a little more compassion, a little more nuance, a little more compassion. And he says, so we can, if we see these thoughts, feelings, and emotions as something that's bad about us or that's wrong about us, then we'll be self-judging. Whereas if we see them just as expressions of the mind, we'll be able to work with them. We'll be able to engage those thoughts, feelings, and emotions, engage with them, work with them, make them workable, rather than being things we feel that we have to suppress or run away from, or to suppress or blindly engage in. So then, after it's proposing this middle way, Mingyur Rinpoche says, that is the basic definition, this idea of looking at the various thoughts, emotions, and so forth as an expression of the infinite potential of the mind. And he said, this is what is referred to as meditation. Then he says, as mentioned a while back in the book, he says it's known in the Tibetan language by the word gom, G-O-M, which is to become familiar with. And then he says, through meditation, we become familiar with the mind and how it works. And then he says, the mind is so intimately related to the way we relate to ourselves that it's difficult to see our mind at first. In other words, we tend to jump into and believe the story that our mind is telling us about what's happening. It's almost as though we're commenting on our life continuously. I am doing this, I am doing that, this is happening to me, I am doing this. There's this self that we believe in is the main character of this novel that is our life. And so he says, but we can step back from that and look at the mind as though from the outside through the practice of meditation. And everybody who's meditated knows how this works, because you start with a technique of meditation where you apply your mind to a specific technique. Let's use breath awareness. If you're being aware of your breath coming and going and coming and going, you might even create a story about that. I am meditating. My meditation is good, or my meditation is bad. But you could also just watch the mind and stay with the technique, and then notice when our attention is taken away from the object and begins to spin out a story. In other words, we can take a step back from the story that we're telling ourselves about what's going on and see it as though from the outside. And this is, to me, a key facet of meditation's power, that we can actually step back from the story and see the thoughts, feelings, and emotions as just moments of time, moments of experience that rise and fall just like the waves in the ocean. And that they don't necessarily lead to other thoughts if you just let them go. So in any case, this is what we notice when we first start meditating. Mingyur Rinpoche at the bottom of page 130 says, at first it's difficult to see individual thoughts. He said, just as one of my teachers, he said, put it, looking at the mind is like trying to see your own face without a mirror. He says, you have a face and you may have some idea of what it looks like, but that idea is a little bit hazy. Its features are obscured by layers of impressions that are constantly shifting depending on our attitudes and emotions. Similarly, we know we have a mind, but its features are blurred by the rapidly overlapping thoughts, feelings, and sensations, thoughts and feelings about our thoughts, feelings, and sensations, and thoughts, feelings, and sensations about our thoughts, and about our thoughts about our thoughts, feelings, and so on. He said they can pile up like cars crashing on a highway. And I've had this happen to myself, but I've had other people tell me, oh, I am thinking. And then they can't let go of the thought because they're invested in the story of being a perfect meditator who has somehow magically has no thoughts. And so then they say, oh, I'm a bad meditator. And I'm so angry at myself. So there we have like 2 or 3 layers. We have the distraction, the original distraction. Then we have the story about the distraction. And then we have the emotion about the story about the distraction. And it just gets thicker and thicker and thicker. And so what he's saying is that he said, our mind is always active. And that he said, let's see, for example, he says, we find ourselves captivated by all of the activity. And he says, and then he talks about going from window to window to looking out of our house at our front yard, the backyard, the driveway, our neighbor's house, caught up in the habit of looking through a window and defining experience in terms of what we see through it. He says, we don't recognize that the window itself is what enables us to see. Turning the mind to look at the mind is like looking at the window rather than focusing exclusively on the scenery. He says, in so doing, we began very gradually to realize that the window that we see through, the window and what we see through it occur and arise for us simultaneously. If we look out a window in one direction, for example, we'll see clouds, traffic, rain, and so on. And then he said, in a particular, if we look in a different direction, we'll see them differently. But he said, if we take a step back and look at the entire window, we can begin to recognize these limited or directional perspectives as different aspects of a vaster panorama. And then he said, there is an unlimited realm of passing thoughts, emotions, and sensation coming through this window, yet not affecting the window itself. There's another example that's used in some classic Tibetan Buddhist texts, which is the mirror. Everything can appear in a mirror, but the mirror itself is not affected by what appears in it. So you can use the window analogy, you can use the mirror analogy, but whichever of them you use, there is a difference between the window and what is shown through it, but they are occurring simultaneously. And so how do we figure this out? Well, Mingyur Rinpoche says that 2,500 years ago, the Buddha introduced a number of practices aimed at helping us step back and observe the mind. And then he says in the following pages, we're going to look at 3 of the most basic of these, which can be practiced anytime and anywhere. Before he gets into the techniques, he talks about basics. And so that leads us to the next section, which he calls taming the horse. When I learned about meditation, the Lama who was teaching said that the practice of meditation involves putting the body at ease and putting the mind at ease. Body at ease, mind at ease. And Mingyur Rinpoche in this book uses the example of a horse and its rider. So the rider in this particular case, he says on page 133, he says that I was introduced when he was first a young meditator. I was introduced to an analogy handed down through generation of Tibetan Buddhist teachers and students, comparing meditation to the relationship between a horse and a rider. The rider is the mind, and the horse is the body. While a calm rider can soothe a restive horse, a steady horse can also calm a restive rider. So in other words, the body and the mind can have an impact on each other. They can help each other if they're both in balance. And so he says, when we first begin to meditate, the mind is like a restive or anxious rider, sometimes agitated, jumping around between thoughts, emotions, and sensations. The mind is sometimes so overwhelmed by all of this jumping around that it becomes dull, unfocused, and exhausted. So it's important to seat ourselves on a steady horse, so to speak, to establish a physical posture that's simultaneously relaxed and alert. And so the physical posture, he says, has to be neither too tight or too loose. And so he said, if you're too tight, you become agitated. And if you're too loose, you become dull. And so then he goes to some detail about what he calls the 7-point posture of Vairochana. Vairochana being the name of one of the 5 Buddhas that means illumination, sort of like sunlight illuminating. And he lists the points of physical posture in a slightly different order that than Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche presents them in his 2 books, Dharma Paths and Excellent at the Beginning. But they cover essentially the same points. You build the posture from the bottom up, starting with the legs. And so on page 134, he talks about these building blocks of the meditation posture, saying that your legs, if you're sitting on the floor, provide the basis or foundation for the rest of the body. Now, if you're sitting in a chair, the way to do this is to put your feet flat on the floor, about hip width apart, so that your hips and your feet are in a line with each other if you're sitting in a chair. And if your feet don't touch the floor, you have to put a cushion underneath your feet so that they rest flat on the floor, and that your knees have my visual aid here, that your hip and your knee and so forth are at the nice 90-degree angle. So that's the first posture, but he speaks about sitting on the floor. Of course, like most teachers, he says the Vajra posture, or the sometimes known as the lotus posture in Hatha Yoga, where the left foot is on the right thigh and the right foot is on the left thigh. He said this is ideal. And Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche agrees with this, because he says it gives you a place to put your cupped hands. You can actually put them on your upturned feet. He says it's very convenient. Unfortunately, most of the people I know who have learned meditation cannot sit in this Vajra or lotus posture, and they feel less than. They criticize themselves and say, well, my meditation can't be any good because I can't sit in the perfect posture. But Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche himself said that he no longer could sit in that posture, and yet he was able to meditate. So he said we have to be willing to sit in whatever posture works for us. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about all 7 of these postures, and then I'll pause and we can have a discussion about it. This way, if I can talk about all 7 postures, then we can talk a little bit about how it helps balance the body and the mind. Then we can stop and have some questions. So again, he starts with the legs. Then he talks next about the hands. The sutras say that you can place your left hand on the bottom, your right hand on the top, and then your thumbs can touch one another. Now, not everyone can sit with this posture, and he says that because different people have different lengths of arms and legs, that they may not be able to rest their arms down on their laps. Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche said that because of this, because most people could not sit in a posture where they could rest their hands on their upturned feet, he said he preferred to teach the method of meditation, of placing your hands, that was used by Marpa the translator. Interestingly enough, Mingyur Rinpoche, since the writing of this book, has mentioned the Marpa's pose frequently when he teaches meditation. That the pose of Marpa the translator, which you see in iconographic representations of him, is he is sitting with his hands palm downward on his legs, and with the fingers curled in front of his knees. Now, not everybody can sit in that way. Some people have to place their palms flat on the tops of their legs because their arms aren't long enough to drape them without rounding their shoulders and moving forward. Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche said that this round-shoulderedness, and he said it really makes people fall asleep. So he preferred for people to sit up straight, place their hands palm downward on the legs wherever they land. And of course, as you know from reading Khenpo Rinpoche's books, Dharma Paths and Excellent at the beginning, he also talks about touching the thumb to the base or the first joint of the ring finger, closing the hands in a light fist and resting them palm downward on the legs in something he calls the paws of the lion's paws. So that's the legs, and then the hands. Next, Mingyur Rinpoche talks about the spine, and that the arms are the next thing that Mingyur Rinpoche talks about, and that they need to be resting in such a way that they allow the chest to be open so that you can breathe, and not be round-shouldered so that it's difficult to breathe. That you should sit up straight with your shoulders straight. He makes a comment on page 135 about something called the wings of a vulture, which he says many people misunderstand from the meditation manuals, thinking they have to sit like this. But that's not it. The idea is that you have this sort of broad-shoulderedness that allows your hands to rest and your chest to be open, so breathing is easier. Then he talks about the spine, how the spine has to have its nice natural curves. Afterward, he talks about the neck, and then he makes comments about how some people make a very severe look with their neck. Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche said that you can avoid that severeness and discomfort that Mingyur Rinpoche describes on page 136. You can avoid that just merely by tucking the chin in slightly to cause a slight double chin. And that straightens your neck vertebrae without them becoming overly hunched. Then Mingyur Rinpoche talks about the position of the mouth. He says, this is on page 136. He says, if we look closely, we may find a habitual tendency to keep our lips, teeth, tongue, and jaws tightly clenched. He says, but he says that doesn't mean that we should force our mouth open, thinking, oh, well, now I'll have peace, I'll have an open mouth. He said, both of these involve tension. He said, rather, we can just allow the mouth to rest naturally as it does when we are at the point of falling asleep. Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche gave a posture that would allow this relaxation to happen. He said that if you touch the tongue to the upper palate behind your front teeth and allow your mouth to relax, that gives you exactly this posture of slightly open but totally relaxed. And then finally, Mingyur Rinpoche talks about your eyes. He said at first, for many people, when it's difficult for them to have their eyes open, so they try to close them, but then they fall asleep. So he said, maybe the best thing to do is have your eyes lightly open. Keep your eyes lightly open so that you can, so that you are being with what you see rather than trying to go to some fantasy world. And so, so he said it's best to have a soft focus so that your eyes aren't darting around looking at different things. Just keep your gaze steady and unfocused in front of you. So Those are the 7 points of posture, which he then briefed down to 2 points, which I really appreciated at the bottom of page 137. He said, spine straight and muscles loose. Okay, that works. So I like it that he decided to make it simple for us. Instead of naming 7 different things, he said, there's only 2 things you need to know. Spine is straight, but your muscles are loose. So that's a little bit about the 7 points or 2 points of posture. Anybody have questions about the posture, the physical posture? And then we'll talk about the mind after that. Okay.
I have something to say, Lama Kathy.
Oh, sure.
So it's so very hard for me to meditate with my eyes open or just even a little bit. I get very distracted. I just can't seem to. And then sometimes I will get tired when my eyes are shut. So I don't know I don't know.
Yeah. Well, you have one disadvantage, and that is you don't wear glasses. Because this is a joke. I have the same problem when I first started meditating. And I found just by taking my glasses off, my eyes would naturally relax because there's nothing they can see. So that was how I did it at that point. But eventually, Taisyi Rinpoche said that because he said part of the reason that I had problems with being distracted a lot by the visual, he said, is because your lenses, you're so nearsighted that your lenses are so thick that they make your eyes work too hard, he said. They make you over-focus all the time. He said, so it's probably a good idea for you to take your glasses off when you meditate. And that will help your eyes to relax. But he also told me that for me personally, it would be all right if I closed them lightly, as long as I could stay attentive and not fall asleep. So what you might try is, there's 3 things that occur to me. Number 1, you could start with your eyes lightly closed. You could start that way and start by placing your attention on the breath, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. And then staying with that, and then gradually opening your eyes and allowing your gaze to be diffuse, a few feet ahead of you. So that would be the second thing you could do. First is close them at the beginning, establish a rhythm with watching the breath, and then open them slightly, but not looking at anything in particular. And when you find yourself looking at something, then just relax your eyes. It's kind of like what happens when you are watching your breath and a thought arises, where you look at the thought with your attention and you let it go and return to the technique of watching the breath. So when you find yourself, your eyes distracted by and focusing on something, then you let that go and let your gaze be diffuse again. You see what I'm saying? Do you think that's something you could try and see how that is?
Yeah, I'm gonna try it.
Yeah. And Siddhi Rinpoche said that, that he said that if you are seeing something and telling yourself a story about that something, then he said, then that's a bit of a distraction, and you can deal with that the same way you deal with any distraction, is by recognizing its presence and then dropping it and then letting go. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely does.
Because I think that feeling disturbed when your eyes dart around, you can just basically say, I don't need to feel disturbed. I just need to return to the technique. Does that?
Yeah, makes sense.
Because he says something about this in the book. where he's talking about it on page 137. Let me just read what he says, because I was skipping over it for time, but let's just look at it. He says, page 137, he says, you keep your, in the first paragraph, middle of the first paragraph, he says, keep your eyes open. He said, this doesn't mean glaring straight ahead without blinking. This would be the opposite of extreme of being too tight. And then at the same time, it's best to maintain some sort of focus so that the eyes aren't wandering all the time, shifting around from experience to experience. And that's what you were describing, just following around, following things that you see and telling yourself stories about them. He said, we don't have to be attached to a specific focus for our eyes. Sometimes our focus can be a little bit downward, like looking down our nose. Sometimes it could be straight ahead. Sometimes it could be a little upward. He says the idea is to choose a direction, a steady visual perspective through which we can see many changes without being distracted by them. And so for me, Khenpo Rinpoche said that one of the ways I could work with that is by looking downward and just remembering always to look down. And that way, if you find yourself distracted by something going on, you can just notice it as you would notice a thought, and then just return your gaze to the floor and allow it to be diffuse. You're gazing, you're not looking, if that makes sense. So it gives you some things to try.
Yes, thank you. I will.
Yeah. Let me know how that goes, okay? Yes, Daniel.
Can you hear me okay?
I sure can.
Okay. Over the holidays, I've been doing some, I'll call it sitting marathon, where I'm sitting for long periods of time.
Uh-huh.
And I notice sometimes like a wave of fidgety restlessness. And sometimes I will just make this resolve that I'm not moving, I'm not getting up. And sometimes it feels really good. It's like I get to another plane of calmness.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not in pain. It's just like, it feels like just all my samsaric energies swirling in my body, telling me I have to get up and go do something. So I'm wondering what are your thoughts on this, like meeting the restlessness,
Right.
and just saying, I don't care what's going on, I'm not getting up.
Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche has actually talked about this. And I think that the middle way is probably what we have to practice. For example, he used the example of physical discomfort or pain. He said sometimes we feel antsy, like we gotta move. And he said there's a way of addressing this. He said the first thing you do is when you first notice it, the discomfort, he said, tell yourself, I don't have to do anything about this at all. And then after you've told yourself that, I don't have to do anything about this at all, you go back to your technique of watching the breath or whatever your object of meditation is. Then he says, if it comes back again, he said, it's fine for you to move your body to accommodate your discomfort. He said, just don't do it impulsively at the first feeling. He said, this way, he said, you don't just impulsively move when you feel a fidget. You tell yourself there's nothing wrong. You just sit and just let it go, and then go back to the technique. And he said, what this does, he says, is it gently stretches you past what you think you can tolerate in a gentle way. And then he said, then the next time you feel the discomfort, you can move. And he's also talked about this idea here's my thought about the marathon idea. Rinpoche said that it is good to sit and think, I am not going to get up from this seat until the session is over. And he said it depends on the individual, because he said if you have too much agitation, that you become frustrated, he said that's not good. Or if you get too dull and you fall asleep, he said that's not good. So, so he quoted the ninth Karmapa, who said, always leave your meditation on good terms. And this means you don't force yourself to sit for so long that you begin to feel resentful or burdened. So only we know when we are passing that landmark of resentment. And so we have to be absolutely honest with ourselves and not let ambition, oh, I'm going to sit for a real long time and I'm going to surpass my record and all of that kind of stuff, because that's not healthy either. So you see what I'm saying? It's like there's a certain amount of that that's important to do, but not if it is going to bring up resentment or like a sense of competition with yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it really helps me to see there's a distinction between impulse versus pain. Sitting through the impulse, okay, I need to assess that. Is it pain or just an impulse?
Mm-hmm. I get that. And tell yourself there's nothing you have to do about that right now. And then see what happens. And it's okay. And it's also okay to move, he said, if you're really in physical pain, or if your leg's falling asleep, and you can do these kinds of things. But everybody has limits right now. We all have limits. And so it's kind of good to respect them so that you don't feel the resentment. You don't get to the place of resentment or frustration. That's what the ninth Karmapa was getting at when he said, leave your meditation on good terms. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Cool.
Perfect.
Yeah, but so I'm all for people having some strength about keeping to their meditation, but we just have to watch. See, and that's why this middle is so interesting. You both have to be strong, but you have to also be understanding and kind. So it's a balancing act that we're probably going to get wrong for a while, and then we'll get it right. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm glad we had this conversation. Well, I have a few more things to talk about. Is there any other question about the posture? Okay, then let's talk a little bit about what he says on page 138 when he starts to talk about recognizing attention in the body and working to let go of it. He says in the first paragraph on page 138, he said they can also, he said counteract. He said both approaches to taming the horse help to counteract the common tendency to slouch in a way that compresses the lungs and digestive organs, constricting the full range of our physical capacities. He said they also provide a physical reference point that can assist us in bringing our awareness back to the present moment of experience, when the mind, the rider, drifts, wanders, or fixates on a particular point of view. Then he says, I can say from personal experience that flopping down in the middle of a meditation session is a way of bringing oneself back to the present moment. And he says, recognizing tension in my muscles or other body parts has been quite useful in pointing out mental or emotional habits grounded in fear, desire, and other manifestations of attachment to a sense of me, distinct from everything that is not me. And so then he talks about the finding a physical equilibrium. It takes time. And then he also says it helps to establish a balance between what he calls three aspects of experience, known in Sanskrit as prana, nadi, and bindu, and in Tibetan as sa, lung, and tigle. Then he says prana or lung refers to the energy that keeps things moving. Yeah. Then he says nadi or ta are the channels through which this energy moves, and bindu or tigle refer to drops of a vital essence propelled by energy through the channels. On the physical level, he says bindu or tigle may be compared in very simple terms to blood cells. Nadi or ta could be compared to the arteries, veins, and capillaries through which the blood flows. Prana or lung could be compared to the energy that propels the heart to pump blood through the intricate network of veins, arteries, and capillaries, spread it throughout our muscles and organs, and draw it back again. He said these forces of prana, nadi, and bindu all work together. If the prana is inconsistent, then the movement of the bindu is inconsistent. And if the nadi are blocked or clogged, then the prana is inhibited and the movement of bindu is constricted. So he says on a subtler level, he says, so this is a little bit about saying that, and Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche addresses these things also in his book Dharma Paths, when he talks about the movement, that all of these physical postures bring about a sense of equilibrium in the body that leads the mind to relax and to be able to relax in itself. And that the movement of the energy in the body, when it is regular and in balance, he said it helps your mind to relax. So when the body is relaxed, the mind is relaxed. And he said, but just like Mingyur Rinpoche here talks about a sense of relaxed attention. This is the equilibrium that he's talking about, because he said he says on a subtler level on page 139, he says prana, nadi, and bindu are various aspects of the mind. Bindu is the aggregate of concepts: me, you, I like, I don't like. And then he said nadi is the link between these concepts. Prana is the energy that keeps these concepts moving and flowing. And so he says, if we can arrange the body in a way that balances its physical aspects, we open ourselves to the possibility of their subtle aspects. In other words, taming the horse provides a physical basis for taming the rider or the mind. And then in the next section on page 139, he talks about the mind, working with the mind. And he starts with a quotation from Jamgon Khantrul the Great, who says, "Rest your mind like the movement of swells upon the sea." And by that, he means the waves rising and falling. And so he said the point, Mingyur Rinpoche says the point of placing the mind is the same as placing the body. Not too loose, but not too tight. And then he says, then he gives an example that he illustrates by saying, you can, using a glass of water, he talks about exaggeration. With exaggeration, he talks about holding the glass of water so tightly that it starts to shake and spill. And with all of this strength of intention, he said, it's too tight and I can't drink the water because I'm being overly tight about it. And then he says, but you could also be too loose, where you just barely move to pick up the glass. And he said, and even then you can't drink it from that either. And so he said, it's better to be just right, not too tight, not too loose. And he says, middle of page 140, he says, finally, in this exercise, he says, I demonstrate a middle way. There's a cup of water, I say. Just relax your hand, move it forward, pick up the glass, and drink. He says, just as in the case of physical posture, the essential point of mental posture is to find a balance. He says, if your mind is too focused or too tight, you'll end up becoming anxious about whether you're a good meditator or not, and you'll become overly judgmental. And if you're too loose, where you just don't care, he said, you will suffer from dullness. And so he said, second to last paragraph on page 140, he says, the ideal approach lies between these two extremes. There's a thought, there's a feeling, there's a sensation. Oh, now it's gone. Oh, now it's back. Oh, now it's gone again, and so on. He says we can treat these appearances and disappearance like a game, the way children sometimes look at clouds. What do you see? I see a dragon. I see a horse. I see a bird. And especially in the beginning, he says on page 141, it's important to keep the game short, playing, according to the classical Buddhist texts, only as long as it takes to swallow a mouthful of food, drink a sip of tea, or take 2 or 3 steps across the room. In other words, he says these short games can be repeated many times in one day. And so I think this might be a point that people are a little confused about. So what he's saying is that when you first place your attention on the object, and let's use he's in the next section, he's going to talk about several objects. He's going to talk about forms, placing your attention on form, placing and having objectless and attention, and so on. He's going to talk about the various things you can attend to. But whatever your choice object of attention is, you place your attention there, and you recognize that it will stay for a little while and then it will wander. And then you notice the wandering, you attend to it, you let it go, and you return to the object again, and think of that return as a fresh start. And so really that's what he's talking about, is that he's saying, don't try to hold your mind with force or tension. Just let your mind rest naturally. And then if it moves, well, then you allow it to move, just watching it and then bringing it back. And by doing this gently over and over again, the gentleness itself produces some relaxation in the mind. And so he says, proceeding in this way, meditation becomes a part of your everyday life rather than something you do because it's supposed to be good for you. Because you can actually practice this when you're not meditating, just letting your attention rest on something for a short time. And then when it wanders from that, you go to the next thing. Over the time, he said, you'll find it easier to maintain longer sessions and look forward to whichever of the 3 basic practices you choose as interesting in itself rather than a duty to perform. And so I think this is where we're going to stop for this evening. And then we can sit for a minute or two and then have discussion about mind and body at ease. And then next time, we'll start with training one's attention, which starts on page 143. So let's sit quietly for a moment. I don't have a gong with me right now. Could one of you set a timer and have us sit for about 4 or 5 minutes? Could someone do that? I see Jody nodding her head. Okay, good. So reviewing the way Mingyur Rinpoche told us to arrange our posture. If you're sitting in a chair, feet flat on the floor, hands palm downward on the legs, the shoulders straight, the back, noticing the back has its nice curves in it. The chin can be tucked in slightly. The tongue can be touched to the upper palate behind the front teeth, which relaxes the muscles of the jaw and face. And the eyes can be cast downward a few feet ahead. So we'll sit just quietly, putting our mind to following the breath as it comes in, following the breath as it goes out. Now, if you have another way of attending to the breath or another object that you attend to, you can do that as well. But we'll sit quietly now for just a few minutes, practicing this not too tight and not too loose.
That's the timer.
Okay, thank you. Something that Situ Rinpoche said is when you complete your meditation, you can take a moment and just open, if your eyes were closed, you can open them a little bit. And he said, don't like impulsively move really quickly. He said, don't be like that. He said, just, sort of return to everyday awareness and alertness gradually. And he said, don't pop up out of your seat. And he said that's this way you can maintain some of the continuity of your of the attention that you've been cultivating. So that's a little tip from Situ Rinpoche. So now that we have about 5 minutes. So if folks have questions about the body posture or the how to place the mind, we can have a little discussion about that.
I have a question.
Yes.
I was happy, Kathy, to hear you say you can rest the palms on your thighs facing down, because I've never felt comfortable, and I happen to have very long arms with my palms up.
Right.
I
Mhm.
don't know why, it just feels weird.
It has to do with the length of the length of our arms. It just does. I have very long arms, and
Oh,
and
so if our arms are long, it's less comfortable.
yeah,
I think you're right.
and
Uh,
Kemper Rinpoche, he was all about. He said, it's okay to adjust things a little bit, because he said he felt that this posture. He said he didn't like to teach it to people. He said, because he says what happens is he said people tend to slouch and then their chest kind of caves in and they can't breathe, so
That's so interesting.
yeah,
And like my Qigong teachers always have your palms up to receive
yeah.
information from the celestial realms. But I feel too vulnerable. I feel more grounded with my palms on my thighs.
In fact, Kempo Karthar Rinpoche was asked that question, and he said, we're not trying to receive something. He said, in shamatha, we're working with the mind. And so he said, he said, we're grounding, we're being grounded.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's perfectly fine for you to sit with your hands down. And I just find it so interesting that Marpa, this lay person who wasn't a monastic at all. He's the one who sort of pioneered this
Yes,
posture. And I
yes.
just think that's so great because he's, Mr. Practical. Yeah, so
Practical is good. And
yeah.
should the tongue be at the roof of the mouth, like the mouth should be
It depends on your how you're
your
made. Kempo Rinpoche said that the tip of the tongue can touch the upper palate behind the front teeth. He said, but you can flatten your tongue. Nah.
mm-hmm.
And then that naturally allows your jaw to relax so that you're not holding tension in it. But for some people, placing the tongue like that brings tension to them. So then they just have to let the tongue be natural while allowing the mouth to relax a bit, just as you would as you were falling asleep.
Mm-hmm.
So because if you're clenched, if your teeth are clenched as you're falling asleep, it can make your jaw hurt.
Of course. That makes sense to me. What
Yeah.
I have to be careful of is sometimes I have a very bad neck. And
Oh,
some without realizing it, I'll jut my neck forward, which is a
mhm.
very bad habit. I'm actually getting
Oh, yeah.
physical therapy for my neck.
Yeah.
So I have to work on a little bit, pushing my chin down and my
Just a little bit, not a lot, just a
shoulders.
little. And you can feel it. You can actually feel the vertebrae in the neck.
Yes.
When you just tuck it in just a little bit, then you can feel the shift in the vertebrae, and it's actually a comfortable shift for most
It's
people.
a
But
subtle adjustment, very subtle and
yep.
minimal. But I didn't know this, but my therapist said, my PT therapist, she's
Uh-huh.
like, you walk, you're looking upward at the sky,
How
which
about
is not really good, right? Because then I'm not looking around. So I've been concentrating on just tucking my chin slightly, but at the same time pushing my shoulders down and back.
right? That's good because that gives that chest that openness so that your breath can be natural. That's good stuff.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that. Let's see, is there anyone else who has yes, Bruce.
This is off topic, but since I happen to be seeing you and I'm not sure what's appropriate here, but you met my husband Bond,
Yeah,
and Bond knew what you were going to be leading tonight.
yeah,
He requested that, and I think perhaps when in your a Tonglen, I'm sorry, Tonglen session, if you have a brief practice of that, that you direct some energy his way. Uh,
sure.
he had a stroke on the 16th,
Oh,
and
mhm.
he's back home now, and we're moving into a new phase.
I understand.
So
Yeah, yeah, and yes, and remind me, how does he spell his name?
BOND.
Okay, very good. Okay, very good. Yes, I can include him in my practice, and yeah, we can actually do a short practice even tonight.
Oh, that would be really good.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear about this, but as you say, the change is part of what's going on in life, right? And so,
Mhm.
yeah, and so I'm happy to do that. Yeah, definitely happy to do that for him. And I'm glad he asked. Thank him for me, because it gives us an opportunity to practice. So it's very meritorious uh,
Indeed.
to to ask for people to practice. In addition, many of you who are monitoring the well, you may not be monitoring all of the channels on the KTD WeChat, but I was asked to request prayers this evening for another gentleman whose name is Jeff, who has had a terrible life-limiting situation arise, and it could be that he'll even pass away this evening. He's been a Dharma person for a long time.
Mm.
So now we can pray for and do Tonglen for Bond, definitely, and also remember our brother Jeff.
Mm.
So yeah, and so we have there's a lot going on right now, isn't there?
Mhm.
And this is something we can do for each other. Because of the shortness of time, I think I'll curtail questions here if that's all right with everyone. And I'll go ahead and lead the short Tonglen practice. And this will just be a few minutes, but I think it'll be very helpful. And then you can continue your practice after reciting whatever prayers that you like to recite, or doing whatever practice you like to do for Bond. And then also remembering our friend Jeff. Placing the body in the posture of meditation, let's start just by letting the mind calm a bit by following the breath in and following the breath out. Just do that for a few cycles of breathing. Now, turning our mind toward the three jewels of refuge, we take refuge in the Buddha as the teacher, the Dharma as the path, and the Sangha as the community. And we begin with our brother Bond, and think that as we breathe out, we give goodness to him. Giving healing to him. And peace to him. As we breathe in, we think we remove pain, suffering, anxiety, concern. And as that difficulty merges with us, it meets our pure motivation, and all of that difficulty dissolves into nothing and disappears. Breathing out, we give goodness. Breathing in, we remove the suffering and difficulty, and it dissolves into nothing and disappears. Breathing out goodness. Removing suffering on the in-breath, and it dissolves into nothing and disappears. So we'll do this practice for Bond for some time, just a few breath cycles. Next, we turn our attention to all those who are ill and experiencing difficulty. All beings everywhere, including our Dharma brother Jeff in North Carolina. Breathing in, removing suffering, and breathing out and giving goodness to them all. And now we expand and imagine that as we breathe out, we give goodness to all the beings in all of the realms of the world, the universe. And as we breathe out, we give goodness. And as we breathe in, we remove suffering. The meditation concludes by letting go of the visualization and allowing the mind to rest quietly for a few moments. This concludes a short Tonglen meditation. All right. We can think that we are dedicating the goodness of this session to the way that Rinpoche said we could dedicate these is by thinking of all sentient beings and dedicating all of our practice and all of our study to the freedom from suffering of all sentient beings in general, but especially for our brother Bond and also our brother Jeff. So we'll mentally dedicate the goodness in this way, and I'll recite a short prayer. Through this merit, may all achieve the omniscience of Buddhahood. May it defeat our common enemy, wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may we free all beings. May we free all beings. May we free all beings. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Really good to see all of you tonight. And Bruce, feel welcome to be in touch, to reach out, and we can chat. Okay.